Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Theory Forge. This one's kind of a special show today. We are taking a look at a brand new game here with Revival. I've kind of just caught wind of it recently thanks to a guildmate friend of mine here that's actually present on the show today, Astral Echo. There are no names yet. I don't have an overlay fully finished yet, but on the far right we've got Astral Echo, and in the middle we've got Cesara, and myself. You guys are familiar with me, Velix, from Theory Forge, and we're going to talk a little bit about this new game, go over some of the kind of base concepts and introduce everybody to it since it's not a game we've covered before, and kind of talk about how we plan to cover it in the future and what some of our future goals are going to be. So we're really excited about this game. I know both of these two people on here with me today are in love with it, and they're getting me in love with it, and I like what it's got already too, so I am jazzed. I will pass it off. Cesara, tell us a little bit about yourself. You can introduce yourself to the audience, kind of what you do, what you're interested, your background, and so forth, whatever you want.
Okay, well, I'm Cesara. My bio is going to be pretty brief, partly because I'm the type of person and gamer that gets really into one thing at a time, and in terms of MMORPGs, that was definitely the secret world for a while. Became interested in it because I'm a fan of King and Lovecraft, and I stuck around long after I was through the content because I found the community to be really interesting, especially the role-playing community. And you guys know since then that I've been thinking a lot about EQN, but now I'm most interested in seeing how Revival turns out. And on a more baseline level, I'm a student and I'm a writer, so I tend to approach games from the perspective of a writer.
Awesome. We're glad to have you. I am really excited having another writer to talk with. I know the other Theory Forge hosts with me on other shows are, some of them dabble in writing, but yeah, I'm definitely excited, especially for this type of game that, as people will find out, I think it's very story-centric and narrative-focused. I think it's going to cater really well to role players, so which all of us here kind of are. So it's going to be awesome to have you on the show. And Astral, go ahead and give us your spiel.
Yeah. Okay, so I am a very, very, very long time MMORPG player. I got my start with EverQuest back when I was 12 years old and trolling people asking for gold and free teleports out to... I used to think that BB meant Black Burrow and not Butcher Block because I was just that unaware of the world around me. And I've basically been following the genre for pretty much every title that's come out ever since. Been trying to set down roots again for a while, and sometimes it's difficult. You know, ever since the World of Warcraft craze, and you know, we've seen how that's affected development of games. And recently, you know, with EverQuest Next being announced in 2013, I think that was the beginning of a shift away from that model, and especially with how WildStar and Elder Scrolls went, I think that we're finally going to see things getting shaken up a bit. But Revival in particular, I think, really resonates with me as a gamer, as a role player, in terms of what I actually want out of a game. Revival, at least what they're selling, all their talking points, that's really the heart of what an MMORPG should be for me. You know, they say it on their own summary, and I'm going to have to pull it up just so I can even remember what it says. But Revival is an interactive, persistent experience. That to me is what an MMORPG should be. You know, I can play games on my PS4, I can play games on Steam. When I look for an MMO, I'm looking for a virtual world, not just a game.
Yeah, I'm definitely jazzed about the fact that this game is taking some angles that a lot of other games haven't pursued, maybe because it hasn't been like the popular market. You know, just avenues of maybe not having fast travel and having a lot of kind of harder earnings in the game and not as achievement focused and more so about like I think the real key point I think that stands out to me is the shift from being a select your character pre-game to being this concept of build your character throughout the experience of the game, which I think is a core value of this game, and I'm looking forward to that one in particular. But with me handling all of the kind of like technical stuff and making sure I don't kill this show, Ashel is going to be leading us kind of through some of the topics that we have for today, and through the through the website we're going to kind of go through some things. So I'll let him take it from there, and you can kind of ask us questions, pose questions, or we can all share our thoughts around in a circle as we go. So
yeah, so just so everyone who's tuning in right now is aware, we wanted to take this opportunity to go over our first impressions of Revival, because the game's been out there for a few months now. At least from what I can tell, the website's been out there since November. I discovered it back late December, early January, and then just started getting involved now that they're going into phase 1. But for those who are just discovering it for the first time, we wanted to set out our first impressions so that everyone could sort of learn about that game for the first time altogether. So we just want to kind of go through some of the core tenets of the game, and we'll go through our thoughts and all that stuff. So I think the first thing that we should tackle is what is Revival, what sets it apart. Like I was saying, there are MMORPGs that are effectively just games. I'm gonna call out World of Warcraft because everyone knows that I have no problem calling out World of Warcraft for its shortcomings. That game is effectively a lobby game. You can play that game, you can quest to max level, and then once you hit that max level, everything that you do exists within a pocket. All of your dungeons, they have no impact on anything other than your own character's personal power, which the only reason that exists is so that you can do additional dungeons that require a higher gear score. PvP, same thing. You do a battle in PvP, it has no bearing on anything around you. They sort of got away from that with Wintergrasp, but I mean, you're talking about one drop in, their entire world is wasted. You hit max level, you stand in a city and you hit Qs, and you have no reason to go back to anything around you. It's terrible. It's a waste of so much development manpower. I don't even know why they continue to work with that model, but it is what it is, and it's profitable. But it's not what I want as a gamer. It's not. I think that most people who are looking at Revival, it's not what they want as gamers. So what Revival does that really speaks to me is it's not about the game. It's about the roleplay. And when I say roleplay, I don't just mean those of us who actually want to take on the idea of a character and actively act out that role. Going in with your these and thous and what do you expect when you hear the word roleplay. But Dungeons and Dragons, or really any tabletop experience, where even if you're not getting into the mindset of the character, you are creating a character, you're cultivating that character's life, and you're making decisions based on what that character would do rather than what you're led through. Revival, from what they're promising, is giving you that opportunity to become that character. Even if you never get into that mindset, even if you're totally focused on the Oscars or The Walking Dead or football or whatever your interest is, even if you're just shooting the shit, you cannot develop that character without it being roleplay in some sense.
What about you, Seth? What are your initial thoughts, like your kind of big takeaway and scope of the game, like what you see right now from how you've dug into it, like what stands out to you, what are you interested in?
Well, one of the biggest things for me about Revival is that there looks like there will be a lot of different stories and a lot of things that we can't foresee, but also everything will be very strongly linked thematically. And I think that's a problem with a lot of games, and MMOs especially, when they release certain content in the beginning and then they add on content later. They try to do something new, but it doesn't always fit in with what was seen previously. So I think that's really nice that we can expect that everything will stay true to Lovecraft. And the other thing in terms of role-playing, that's ideal because we won't have to change how we're operating in the world all the time. And it seems like they're taking a lot of precautions to make sure that nothing breaks immersion. I was reading on the forums that some people were concerned about some of the characters they've seen because they didn't think that it fit in exactly with the world right now. I mean, there's not a lot of screenshots, but from what I was reading from the website, they're really considering what is going to fit in with the world and trying not to do things that will be shiny and fun for a little bit, but ultimately not add to what's happening.
So I think that we should probably take a step back because you went into something that I completely forgot to mention, which is the setting. You know, when we talk about what sets this game apart, oh my goodness, what sets anything apart from an MMORPG when you don't involve elves? And granted, we don't know what the race situation is with Revival yet, but as someone who desperately loves playing elves in fantasy games, I really hope there are no elves in Revival. I really hope it is a human-only situation. Maybe Ombwa, who's sitting in the chat, can confirm, but Revival, at least from what I understand of it, you know, it is two things. It is a medieval setting, and it is Lovecraftian horror, which is interesting because, you know, you think about high fantasy, and high fantasy is your medieval setting, but with those fantastical elements, those Tolkien-esque elements. You know, you got your elves, your dwarves, and so that combines to form whatever our expectations are of high fantasy. Mm-hmm. So you strip all that away, and you get back to the roots of medieval, which in reality is not fantasy magic, you know, happy-go-lucky spells and elves and fairies and crap.
Yeah.
It's a very dark setting. You know, you've got war, you've got plagues, you've got beheadings. I mean, you have
and cults.
And cults. Oh, yes,
you know,
you've got to love your cults.
It almost kind of, to just cut in real quick, it almost kind of sounds like, you know, more of this King Arthur-esque fantasy. You know, it's all humans mostly. Magic is not a major component. You know, magic is there, but it's not like wizards are everywhere around the corner, you know. So I kind of get that from it. It seems like it's this divergence to more of this typical medieval, you know, classical medieval, not necessarily the modern inventions of Tolkien and some of the other great, you know, high fantasy writers and creators over the last century or so.
And I think that's actually, that plays really well with the Lovecraftian element, because Lovecraft to me has always been the strangeness of the unknown and the horror of the unknown, and things that are just outside of your reality, you know, the supernatural distilled into what it really means to be supernatural. So when you combine that with medieval era stuff, I mean, you're talking about a low fantasy setting where the alien isn't just, you know, characters like Morgan Le Fay or Merlin, who are magical and powerful within their realms, but not necessarily something to fear. And you take magic as it exists in a setting like Conan, where magic is this insanely powerful, insanely dark, dangerous aspect of the world. And I mean, I just, the setting to me erupts with possibility when you do that.
Yeah, for the fans of the show that were watching this previous Saturday when we had Steve Denuser, formerly at Daybreak and also worked at 38 Studios, Kingdom of Amalur, he brought up some really interesting comments about, you know, we were talking about story and narrative in the industry, and, you know, how it's for so long it's kind of gotten to where this, you know, it's this narrative content consumption where, you know, developers are basically creating narrative and the people that come into the game are just consuming it. And from an earlier point, Cesar was saying this whole content dynamic that they're aiming at for this game is like, you know, taking all these things you're talking about right now, wrapping up this traditional, really dark, really potent type of magic and this classical medieval elements, and starting to infuse it into something that we were seeing. And I know the three of us, you know, being together, interested, like all absorbed in EverQuest Next for a while, they're like, one of the great appeals to that, I think we can all pretty much agree with, was the return to story and how their emergent AI that they were planning on, that are still planning on, as far as we know, doing in that game was, you know, creating this type of dynamic, ever-changing environment where consequence would happen. And that's a facet that we're seeing in this game, and it seems like Revival has even kind of got more concrete on what they want to do with that. And narrowed things down. So I think that's a really interesting feature, and it really plays into, you know, the feel of the game as far as what they want to do with their live team, their live storytelling team, and take that dynamic content and really package up this whole thing as, you know, it's really this visceral feel you get when you're playing the game. It's not so much a set of systems or anything as much as it is, I think they've said it on their website too, that like the rule of the world is, you know, how it all feels, you know, however the systems work and everything. They want it to feel visceral, they want it to feel this medieval, you know, this potency, this real intense experience, and let people enjoy that. So that's something that really stood out to me. I just wanted to kind of bring that up in there. But what...
Yeah, and I think just to say briefly, I think the result of the fact that there will be a changing history of the cities will bring in a totally different player base than you usually see for MMORPGs. And I'm personally excited to see what kinds of people would be interested in that, because it seems that people who are going to be interested in the changing history will be interested in being there for a long time and being immersed. Because if you just want to hop in and play some content and then switch over to a new game, you're not going to care as much about what happened in the past and the ways you can shape things. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think that one of the things that I'm constantly reminded of when I look at Revival is my experiences with Star Wars Galaxies. You know, I think Star Wars Galaxies represents a very specific style of play to me that, I mean, anyone who played it can pretty much agree that you just haven't been able to capture that anywhere else since. And part of that is just the nature of the way that the game was constructed, but because of how the game was constructed, it influenced the types of players who played it. And yes, you had your people who were achievement grinding, you had your people who just chased after Jedi, especially when they made that a much clearer path to follow. But prior to that, you know, you had people who basically lived out their own specific roles in that world. No one was necessarily concerned with, oh, I have to have the absolute best of the best gear. Or if that was their concern, it wasn't a matter of grinding through static content that had already been created. It was a matter of going out, making friends with crafters, learning the best materials, and actually forging the best piece of gear. You know, these are stories that you're telling. Even though you could, again, you know, I go back to the thought of this is roleplay. Even if you're not role-playing the characters, you know, you are telling a story.
Yeah, the storytelling elements of me are what attracted what has been attracting me to games recently. I took like a long break from MMOs for a while. I played some while I was in the military a little bit, like 2005, 2006. I dabbled in WoW, and that was, you know, the last MMO I played. The first was like Ultima and EverQuest kind of together. But I took a long break, you know, and games like vanilla WoW wasn't too bad, actually, you know, like having that initial narrative was really good, and it was kind of a different take on things, but it seems like it's changed a lot. And also, you know, even the games of old, like that we've really loved, like EverQuest, has changed like dramatically over the course of the years to some of this more, you know, content. The word is really theme park, you know, this theme park content, and it feels like we're seeing a rise of games that are moving away from that. Like EverQuest Next was Crowfall is an up-and-coming title that's kind of moving away from this theme park model into a more of a sandbox thing. And I know Crowfall is kind of PvP-ish for the people that are following that game, but Revival, to me, and one of the reasons I think that it's worth doing a total show on, you know, and just having something to cover constantly, is that, you know, it's not going to be this static consumed content that, like, once something exists, it's happened, it's done. Cesar mentioned the you know, the way history is going to be changing constantly, you know, so having something that, you know, following all the dev blogs, and as we go through development, we're going to cover like a lot of different things as things are changing. But it's kind of a cool potential for things as, you know, gamers get involved in this and follow the game and play the game. You know, you're going to be involved in this ever-changing history. You know, you might have a major role in certain events of, you know, in different instances, and you'll be a part of that history and lineage. So I think it's something that's like, it's almost like an episodic TV show, you know, where you're getting constantly, and it's something that I don't think MMOs have really had. I mean, if anything, people could say maybe that each new patch or update is an episode, and they're, what's the quickest game that patches out there? I think maybe a couple months at the most. So it's really interesting, and I think it seems like games and the gaming industry is moving in this direction. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Telltale games getting really popular, and having this, and a lot of that is their IP usage of like Walking Dead and stuff, but it's becoming a popular thing. People want to be involved in story and ongoing stories, and more importantly, I think the social relationships and dynamics is what people really crave that have gone away, in recent games, and it seems like we're seeing a revival of that, which, like, no pun intended any more than the people that like titled the game Revival. I think they mentioned that on their website too, but that's kind of the spirit they want to bring back. So I'm like super enthusiastic about. I mean, I haven't seen any things on specifically about this game that really give me any turnoffs yet. Everything's been something that's exciting, that's a twist on a current feature or a new innovation that I like. I like the direction as opposed to what is the current standard that's out there. So.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, I think maybe we should dive into some of these specific features that they've been talking about for Revival. There are so many of them to cover. I'm reading some of the comments in chat, and I believe Diggs said that we're not even scratching the surface here, and that is so incredibly true.
Yeah, not even close.
And I think that's what's so exciting about this game is everything about this game is possibility. And it's not just because the devs are promising what they are, but I think it's because of the vision that the devs have. If you think about games, I think of them as being designed two ways. Either they're designed for content consumption or they're designed for systems. Games that are designed for content consumption are games like World of Warcraft, or another good example that I think is relevant to Revival is The Secret World, another Lovecraftian horror-themed game, but it's all about content consumption. And once you've gone through that content, there's really nothing else to do but sit there in a static world, and you can pretend to be whatever you want to be, but it's all just pretend. And even Funcom themselves actually drifted away from that content consumption model after The Secret World failed. We'll just use the word failed. They actually pulled out of making those sorts of MMOs, and they just said, we're going to make systems-based games because those are more sustainable, and those are what drive, that true dynamic play. And so I think that what Revival is doing when they have those systems, your brain can just explode in terms of what's actually available out there, what these systems can intersect and do, and what it ultimately culminates in. The possibilities are truly endless. And even thinking to Theory Forge and the way that you guys would talk about EverQuest Next, a lot of what you guys talk about is all hopes and dreams of what comes through in EverQuest Next, but we know nothing about EQN systems.
Yeah.
What we know with EQN systems, it's actually really hard to envision a lot of what you guys talk about happening. I don't think the same is true for Revival. I think when you talk about Revival, if those systems are actually in the game, they just present so many opportunities. So yeah, we're really just scratching the surface. But let's see. If we're going to pick one thing to talk about first, I think maybe we should talk about skill development, because if we're talking about building characters and roleplay, I think that's where it really begins, is how you develop those skills. So for those who aren't familiar with Revival yet, Revival is not a class game. You're not going to log in and pick a warrior or a wizard and go hunt 10 rats. Revival is based on skills, and we're talking a myriad of skills based on what we've heard from the devs so far. So swordplay, which could be, basic swordplay that evolves into something like fencing. You have non-combat skills like cartography, where you're actually devising maps for the world, or astrology, where you're following the star patterns to understand the best time to conduct rituals. There are many opportunities to really build the character that you want to build. And another interesting thing is that, I play a lot of Final Fantasy XIV right now, and I think EQN was also drifting towards a system where even though you didn't have classes, your skills were... You can basically collect them all. It was like Pokemon. Put in enough time, level up enough, and you can eventually do whatever, and you can switch between whatever. Revival is aiming for skill decay, which I absolutely love, because you can change your character, but you're changing them in real time. And so you're not just becoming a master of everything and unlocking things, you're actually shifting the course of their life.
Which I think makes a lot of sense in terms of the roleplay aspect, because if you're playing one character for 5 months as an archer, and then you're going to say, okay, well now I'm going to whip out my magic that I learned a really long time ago, of course it's not going to work so well, but in a lot of games you can do that. And the other thing I love about the skills is that how it relates to crafting. And that's a whole other topic, so I won't go into that yet, but I'm excited to see that even those skills will be very robust, and everything will have to be something you work at, and they're not just going to limit it to the combat.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to start some drinking game for this show or something for every time I mention my love of, like, the story infusion roleplay, because I'm sure you guys are going to hear me say that 1,000 times. I need to start, like, smacking myself. But yeah, like, what Cesar was saying, just to build off of that, you know, the fact that the way they want you to earn your skills and actually, like, build your character over time is just such an intuitive experience for one thing. You know, people are just going to have a natural, you know, I'll pursue what I want to pursue in the game, what I want my character to be like, and the skills are going to kind of automatically kind of happen for you as you know, research and investigate the world and do things. And, you know, I think I said it to a friend when I was explaining them to the game last night, but it's kind of this, you are the sum of your actions type thing. You know, what you do in the world is, you know, who you are and what you are. And I think, you know, you mentioned Astral the Decay is a really important feature, because it almost seems like this whole concept they have is like a re-envisioning and a reimagining of Ultima Online's original skill system. I don't know how many people are familiar with that are watching in the chat, but, you know, having these skills that you had a certain amount of points, and you would, as you use stuff and as you did them, they would go up. And if you know, you would kind of max out, and if you wanted to branch out in other things, you would have to, you know, unlock a certain skill that you wanted to decay as you progress another one up. And I thought that was a really cool system that didn't see too much innovation. You know, EverQuest kind of hit and took off, and people just went with this traditional tabletop, you know, I pick my skills and I just always have them. And so we didn't really see a lot of innovation from that, and I think their A works like that. And another thing Cesar said about this, you know, the crafting and other things, I think one thing that's important that we can kind of segue here into is, like, combat is actually not meant to be the, you know, be-all end-all to this game. It's really, from the scope of the things I've been reading, it seems like, you know, combat's maybe a fourth of the game or even less, because, you know, there's going to be all kinds of crafting mini games. There's going to be diplomacy, player trade, player economy, where, you know, combat is just this tiny, you know, augment to other things that you might be doing, you know, to escort your goods, to doing. So I feel like, you know, skills are going to give you a lot of ways to change your character and paths to pursue outside of combat. Like you mentioned, I'm kind of reiterating, but it's really important. And I think when we get into crafting, it's pretty exciting. I'm kind of excited to get into it too, Seth. It's like, I mean, the concepts they have for these mini games don't feel like these cheesy, typical things you see other games do, and it's, you know, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Go ahead.
All yours.
Okay, I was going to add one thing. Because it looks so good, I'm a little bit concerned about the fact that they're going to make it available for tablets and iPhones, because I can definitely see myself crafting all day. It might be too good, but go ahead, Astral.
I was going to say, you know, it's probably a perfect time to get into crafting, and I think we can really talk about all of the non-combat systems, really, because, you know, it's crafting, it's the economy, it's the politics, it's their concept of player influence. And, you know, again, I have to bring in my role-playing experience into this, which is one of my challenges. I always like to play characters who are masterminds, who are, you know, top of the food chain, hands in a lot of sinister soup sort of thing. And it's very difficult to balance that out against games where my character really is meant to be out in the field questing and fighting and in the dungeons and all that. Part of that, I mean, yes, I could do that. I could stay in town for my entire life, and yet in doing so, I'm severely limiting my game experience. There's no content to be had there aside from what I pretend is there. In Revival, we're talking about fully living and breathing political and economic environments where you can stay there and you can make that the crux of your game, and you can have your cronies who go out there and actually do the dirty work. You can be that person who runs a business empire by actually paying caravans, assuming that gold has true value in this game, or resources have true value in this game. You pay those guards for your caravans. You sit back and you mingle with politicians and you bribe them for power to govern your city. Just enormous potential for play that never, you never have to pick up a sword. You can focus entirely on those non-combat skill trees.
Yeah, and to go off of that, I mean, I played, most of the time in the secret world, I played a politician. So seeing that being a real feature is really, really cool. And I think it's a little bit refreshing for people who don't want to have a character that has the image of being just this really excellent warrior. Because in terms of where the hierarchy is within gameplay, it's always the person that's at combat. And so now I think there will be different hierarchies within different realms, and that will lead to really excellent roleplay because of that.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the crafting, the theory, like just the crafting for one, and the diplomacy. These are like two major. I want to say it's kind of like a four big sections. I see combat, diplomacy, trade, and then also I see plenty of stuff as far as crafting goes. So it's kind of like this four-way street, four big sections at least that we see now, and that's why I say combat is only 1/4 of the pie right now. And I feel like the type of character I've always envisioned has been one that kind of dabbles in everything. The swordsman for sale that has some charisma and is a little bit of a he dabbles in a little bit of everything. He does a little bit of crafting. He's kind of a survivalist nature, but also he knows how to mingle with the politics, and he knows how to vie for power, and just kind of wanders around and gets to be a jack of all trades. And I don't feel like I've ever gotten to have that character roleplay experience in any MMO ever. It's just never been possible in any MMO. There hasn't been one that's provided all those, and whether Revival is able to come through with all of their plans that they want, I really hope they do, because just the core concepts they have, all of those are more than possible with many more possibilities. So it's something that makes me the most excited about this game. I mean, I like looking at Crowfall too, but that game feels like it's catering towards more of a PvP, audience, this player versus player siege strategy thing, which, to me as a role player, that's not what I'm after. I really like the fact that this gives you the opportunity to just be a character, not just have a character and play a character, but you get to be the character, and that's a big draw for me. And I think that these other systems outside of combat are what makes that possible. And the way they're doing them, we talked about skill before, with how you're building it, and it's all intuitive and natural. And if you want to change for some role-playing decision, you're gonna have to actually work on it and almost role-play it out through your actual actions. So it's those kind of things. I'm really excited about all the different systems of this, especially the crafting mini games they've talked about a little bit, kind of given a hint. I think the one that really stood out to me was herbalism. They talked about alchemy, herbalism being this thing where, for their example, you come up to a bush, and as you come up, it kind of zooms in, and you can like examine the bush, pick the right blossoms, or kind of pick through the bush for the parts you want, or maybe kill some pests, or if it's in your garden, there's these kind of mini games that are sensical, they make sense, and they can make doing that thing more similar to real life kind of, and performing that as your art, like that is what your character is, and those are your specialities. So I really I love it.
And I think that comes back to that sense of world, is that maybe it's not, I don't want to say maybe it's not the most fun thing, because of course their goal is still to make a fun game, but you do come across those games where they have mini games for crafting or gathering, and it's like, okay, well, you can do a gathering game that's effectively Candy Crush, and okay, that's fun-ish if that's your thing, but that's not necessarily what that gathering should be. It doesn't make sense that harvesting from a bush or harvesting from a plant is a game of Candy Crush. I think that the idea of going up there and actually, picking up leaves and looking at what's there, and, oh, maybe there's a parasite, maybe there's blight on this plant. It becomes an experience unto itself.
Yeah, do you guys think it will get...
That's a good question. I think everything can get old sooner or later. It's impossible to say that you're ever going to like something forever, that it's ever going to be fun. It could become tedious. That's certainly possible. But at the same time, we're very familiar. The MMO genre, as of late, is a game of no-drop items and meaningless economies. I have to go back to that concept of being able to go beyond doing everything yourself. If you get bored of going after plants all the time, hire someone to do it for you. That's how it was in a game like Star Wars Galaxies, was you could be a master crafter and maybe you didn't have harvesters. Maybe you just had a really good relationship with someone who was really good at getting you those materials. You built a business relationship. You had contracts. That was your gameplay. It was incredible.
Yeah, for me, answering that question, I think that leads perfectly into kind of a feature of the game that we've, I think a little bit touched on, but we haven't really talked about in depth, and I think, it's definitely one that is a core element of the game. I think myself and Astral were talking about it the other night about this, this concept similar to the EverQuest live events guides type thing that they did. They have this plan for they call it a live storytelling team, where there's literally members and developers of the game company for Revival that are paid to be actively in the game, taking on NPCs, taking on creatures, taking on very powerful, if you know some of the lore of the game yet, other elder gods and otherworldly supernatural beings, and being able, and not always those, but sometimes the little man you might not even know, and they're going to actually control these things from time to time, and really change the world. It won't be necessarily just us always having to do the change, which one of their big goals is letting the players drive, the story, but I think it's going to add a lot more real life to the game, because, if you spend enough time in any game, you're going to figure out the AI, you're going to figure out how to predict certain responses to your actions, and that's always going to happen. No matter how advanced the AI gets, I think people are always going to eventually be able to figure it out, even with, new emergent AI. But the fact that they have this team in there that will be paying attention to certain flags and indicators that they're building into the core design of the game, they're going to be able to lock on to certain players or certain items that get picked up and found, or certain things, and use those as plot shift devices or storytelling devices where they can interact with this targeted player that happened to be a part of something or stumbled across something, or maybe they worked their way to achieving something to become this prominent figure that will be a change in the story. And the live team really, to me, is this true stamp of, it's not just saying, hey, we're going to put new AI in the game and we want a dynamic world. This is like the true stamp of saying, this is how you make a world come to life, by actually having live people in it, driving it. So
yeah.
That's
non-artificial intelligence.
Yep, perfectly.
Yeah, and I think, oh my god, we could go on about this particular subject forever, just everything that it entails. And, talking about lofty goals and things that seem too good to be true, which, let's face it, this game is all too good to be true, so, fingers crossed that everything comes to pass. But, historically, it's not like we haven't seen this before. EverQuest 1, if anyone is familiar with, way back in the day, they actually launched what was called the EverQuest Legend server. It was $40 a month, and it had dedicated live events. It also got some premium access to content before it got released on other servers, but the big draw of it was that you had a dedicated GM staff that was constantly running live events 24/7, which was wonderful. Not for $40 a month, but it was still wonderful. And so I do have to first, for anyone who isn't familiar with it, the live storytelling aspect of Revival, it is limited to what are being called gold servers, which are subscription-only servers. So you do have your standard free-to-play servers, and then you do have your gold servers, which are the dedicated 24/7 live events team. So you are paying for the service, but holy crap, it's an awesome service to pay for. And so I think about it. I'm familiar with it on EverQuest Legends, where there was role playing going on, and there was these events that were taking place that were sort of telling a story, but they weren't necessarily cohesive. It was more like, okay, well, here's an event where there's a gnomish race, or here's the event where minotaurs are attacking a city. They're fun and all, but not all that different from what you could find on any normal server. My bigger experience with live events team is when I played Anarchy Online. They always had a dedicated live events team, and they only had 2 servers, and they eventually merged down to 1, so it wasn't really like it took all that much to make that happen. And they also had a fairly small player base anyway, so again, it's not like it was this incredibly lofty goal. But I can say that as someone who had maxed out in that game, who had done everything that there was to see, and who otherwise would have easily passed on to go to some other game, I stayed with that game for years, if only because I was so enveloped in the stories that were being told, and it was so important to me that it wasn't just that I was a witness to these stories, but I was actually involved in them. There were so many instances where I interacted with a GM-controlled character one-on-one, just for hours of roleplay, just involving myself and in this story that was canon. It wasn't just me inventing something and latching it onto the story and saying, okay, let's run with this. It was you're there with the major powers of the world, with the leaders, with the influencers, and even that was limited compared to what Revival's trying to do. In Anarchy Online, the wall that I ultimately ran up against was that you could act in a position of authority. You could influence the influencers to a degree, but you could never overcome the story that was already meant to be told. You could never really replace those major NPCs or anything like that. The impression that I've gotten so far from Revival is that you actually could have that level of authority. You could have that level of power. You could become that major power.
Yeah, I've liked what other games have attempted to do on that in the past, and I think the real win is pairing this concept with this new emergent AI, that they're working on. And I know EverQuest Next was, and from our talk last week with Steve Denuser, he talked about parallel development in the industry where people are watching different things happening, and you'll see a lot of game companies pursuing certain things because they see the market going there. And I think that this old boring static AI is dead. I think the games that have it now are going to die out. I think really only World of Warcraft will probably persist as a game that in any amount of strength or success continues on with this type of content, and even they might later add revision, do some huge thing and add some type of emergent AI in pockets or a whole revamp. We don't know, but the point is I think I see this as kind of a future thing that games are going to move towards, and the fact that you're including that with the live storytelling team really makes it feel different than what's been attempted in the past, which is a huge win for me, and that's why I'm really rooting for this game to do well. But I wanted to I brought that up a little bit because, when you take an emergent AI and you're creating these unique characters that have wants, needs, desires from needs-based AI, and you're pairing them with a team that is controlling the story and driving specific things, taking control of certain people or creatures or things and actually causing change, that's the opportunity where you can actually drive a live narrative. It's not this static narrative that we've had of the past. They preset the quest, they do all these things, and that's the narrative and you just consume it. It's this live narrative that you can jump onto, and it kind of leads us into, okay, there's all these storytelling elements, but what story are they going to tell? And I think that's a big thing for me. As a writer who appreciates a really well written story, that's something that I hold a ton of value in, and I think for a lot of games, it's not always necessary, it's not always important, but in a game like this where there's so much core focus on actually role-playing and actually being a character, being a part of a major plot, a bigger plot, or a bigger theme and world is super essential. And heavy, deep lore and an established game world and a lot of depth you can latch onto as different characters, and especially if they're going human only, which I think I saw Ambwa mention earlier, definitely no elves, so it is leaning heavily human. And you know, if that's the case, people are going to want to customize. People are going to want to find a place where they can latch onto and, you know, develop a sense of themselves and express themselves. So, Seth, you're kind of our, at least so far, you're kind of our expert on Lovecraft here on this show, and that's
okay.
I don't know. Between you two, I know I'm definitely the noob, because I have just recently getting into the Astrarium Guild is where I kind of picked up on some out of necessity, sheer necessity, and I've really liked the bit I've gotten into. And I'm not typically a horror fan or horror theme fans, and this is a little bit different with the kind of the medieval fantasy type horror, but kind of talk a little bit about maybe some Lovecraftian lore, some overarching themes you think that you're already seeing in the game, maybe, and you know, go with it. Just go with it.
Okay, well, that's a really big question. That's a hard question to answer, because we've gotten a lot of concepts about the game, and they said there's a Lovecraftian theme, but I haven't seen any particular screenshots where I was like, yep, that's something right out of Lovecraft. I mean, it definitely all has a feel, to some extent, and at least to the majority of his work, there's some stories I've read by him that I don't think have been represented at all in what they were talking about in the screenshots, and maybe will never be represented, because that's not, I think it's inspiration, and they're not trying to, you know, put everything that Lovecraft ever wrote into what's happening. I think the biggest element is obviously the concept of these very powerful gods, and also the concept of chaos and darkness that comes with it. And they mentioned a couple times factions in the website. And so what I'm imagining is that people will have very strong alignments to certain gods, because then that'll give them more power. And that correlates a lot to what Lovecraft writes about, because it seems almost, not every story, but a lot of stories, his main characters run into some sort of cult that's obsessed with some sort of chaotic god. And so I would be interested to see if that's what the experience is going to be like when you play Revival, because these gods are going to give characters different power. If you're going to run across people that are very into a certain particular god, and that could cause trouble.
Yeah, I'm really, you know, as somebody who's just barely touched into this lore a little bit, like, I don't even feel like I've even scratched the surface. I've been like wiping the glass on the outside, it feels like, but from what I've seen so far, it just feels like this really visceral, like, I really feel like from the couple short stories I've read, it feels so visceral, you know, the type of gritty style of writing he has, as well as, you know, the deep, you know, themes that address, like, seriously, you know, scary issues to existence, to origins, to powers, you know, inexplicable powers in the world. And when you pair that into a created, you know, fantasy environment where people are going to be able to do these things, you know, it sometimes makes me think it's almost even more powerful than writing. So I'm really interested to see, you know, all this lore start to come to life, and actually dive into this lore and learn it as we go through this developer process, which I kind of wanted to bring up as we're getting closer to the end of the show with 10 minutes here to go. We aren't intending for this show to be a total soapbox of the three of us or any guests that we bring on in the future. Hopefully some developers, if they're open to that, and other fans of the game and people that are active in the forums that, you know, have plenty to talk about, we would love to have you on in the future. But the thing I'm getting at really is that, you know, we have some plans, some rough plans for the show that we're getting together. You know, this is a game the three of us are really excited about, and a lot of people are, especially a lot of my other co-hosts on Theory Forge itself, the main show that we do on Fridays. They are excited about it too. So I'm expecting to see a lot more of coverage, and definitely this is kind of the intro show. We wanted to bring up and kind of present some main big things and build some interest to other people out there that may not have heard of this game, because, you know, we want to do a weekly show on this, and we have plans for, you know, going along and following the dev blogs, breaking those down, kind of examining them between our different experiences with Seth as a writer, role player. Adam has a ton of experience from community building with building guilds and understanding a lot of different players and having a ton of experience in the MMOs. And then mine is a little bit different as, you know, writing, kind of providing the platform, but also as writing in the industry from somebody who kind of reviews the games and follows the mainstream thing, and I try to find a game and write about it and give my honest opinion. So I think we've got a good mix here, and we definitely plan on having guests. But I brought up story kind of in the end because another interesting aspect of the show we want to do is kind of include a little bit of a book club along with this show for those that want to participate. It won't be like a mandatory thing by any means, but
it's mandatory.
Okay, she says it's mandatory. It's mandatory. But yeah, so
there'll be a quiz every week.
Yeah, quiz. Seth will write the quiz, and you will be quizzed weekly. But yeah, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna get together a list this week of the Lovecraftian lore. We're gonna try, you know, I'm gonna lean on the experts here. That I say experts, I don't know how expert you guys are, but definitely an expert compared to me. They're gonna come up, go through all the lore, and kind of figure out what might be most applicable to the game, or at least, you know, understanding this whole concept or Lovecraftian field that's being applied to this game. So we're going to come up with a list of the books, and just for you guys that might be scared of words, that don't like reading, they are short. They're not, you know, it's kind of, if you have been following our show from the EverQuest Next side, it's kind of like this, you know, short stories. I don't think many of them are more than, you know, 50 to 100 pages, if that. I think there might be a couple. Yeah,
they're very short.
Yeah.
And most are available online for free, so that's also a bonus.
Yeah, so and that's one of the reasons why we're including this. So what we're going to do is present a list, and that we'll make that available too. We'll post links through Twitter, and we might post out for our individual Twitters. But we're going to come up with a list, and we're going to come up with some books, and you guys can read along with us. You know, they're very short, so you can chomp one down in a week really easily. And you know, we're going to spend like a 10-minute spot and talk about particular aspects of that book, what we liked, you know, what we think would be good for the game, or what we would want in the game from the book, stuff like that. So I think it's going to be a really fun angle to take on it, and so that's going to be a core element, as well as, of course, following the dev blogs and going through more detail in the forums of all the different archetypical breakdowns, some of the skill breakdowns. As we get more information and as things get released, we really want to look at all these features and kind of, you know, not just give our opinions on it, but kind of, if we can, if it's possible, you know, help the community voice their opinions about it in another way that's different than, you know, digging through forums. That, you know, that's not everybody's cup of tea, but, you know, for those of you that like, you know, can throw on a show, maybe you're playing a game and you just want to listen in the background, that's what we're here for. And we're really excited about this game, and we're interested to provide that content for you guys on a weekly basis. So
on that subject, and I'm actually watching Ombwa, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, because if I don't, I know you're going to smite me. You know where I live. He's listing all these wonderful stories, and not the one that I'm choosing, which is making me feel really bad. But we're going to start off with Shadow over Innsmouth, which is, of course, you know, a classic of Lovecraft. You know, one of those stories that you see referenced in so many places. And the reason why I'm choosing that is because the beginning of Revival, the area that players are first going to encounter, is Crown Rock, which I have no idea what Ombwa and his fellows have planned for it, but to me, when you put an island in the middle of an ocean or a sound or a bay, you know, you're just asking for deep ones, and you're asking for the influence of Dagon. So we will be discussing Shadow over Innsmouth and its implications for Revival in our next show.
Awesome. And we are this is an early show, just an intro show. It is happening just on this Sunday right now. It's not our planned normal time. We're going to get together and figure out of other cast members that might want to be on, and other guests and stuff, and kind of figure out what's going to be the best time frame that works for everybody. So, and we'll definitely have that info out as far in advance of the show as we can, not like today, 2 hours of notice that I gave out. So that was partially because I have never actually, I've been on the Theory Forge show, you guys are familiar with me, but I actually have never hosted multiple cams myself, so I think I managed to not fail this time, so I'm considering it a success so far. So, and I always have these great cast members to raise the level of the show regardless. So we want to thank you guys for tuning in. We're kind of wrapping up towards the end of our hour here, but I want to give the other cast members a chance to kind of close out, say their farewells, maybe even actually too, we're still conceptualizing, talk about maybe what your favorite thing you're looking forward to in future shows that you're going to infuse into the mix.
Okay, well, I'll start. I don't really have any closing remarks, but reading the chat when we were mentioning different stories, it's really cool to see that people have a very strong interest. And that's why I was chuckling reading some of people's suggestions. So I think this will be a great thing to do. And also, I'm excited to look at the blogs and see the development of Revival as it happens.
Yeah, I think the best thing about Revival to me, especially coming from some of the other games that I was following, is the involvement of the developers. And I don't know the full size of the team. I believe it's fairly small, compared to what you're used to from a full-on studio. And yet, despite that, the quality of everything that they put out so far is unbelievable. But in spite of that, there's just so much information that comes out regularly. And so, I do have to plug this. If you are not on the Revival forums yet, go there. They are a enormous trove of information about this game, more than you will find just stuff. The developers are there posting constantly, and I have to give a shout out to Northy and Sandoval, because they have put together some really great threads that just summarize a lot of the information that's been posted by the developers so far, and relating them back to the information that's out there just on the website itself, just really pulling it all together. So those are wonderful reads. But I mean, the amount of information that's going to be coming through, the fact that there is a weekly blog, we're going to have so much to talk about.
Yeah.
So, it's going to be a wonderful experience. And also, before we go here, I just have to plug it. So, for those who are just now discovering the game, you can currently buy in as a founder. So, the game has housing, and it's actually going to be released in stages. So, the first stage that's going to be live, or, well, offline. But you're able to purchase land in the game. It is physical space that you're buying within a virtual space. But, it's not Star Wars Galaxies where everyone can put down a house. They are designing these cities with very particular architecture in mind. You are buying a house that is preordained, and, that is your house. It exists in that city. So there's limited space. If you do buy in now, you do get founders access, and the most valuable aspect of that, for me, besides being able to access all the different phases of the game as it comes out, you can join a founders IRC client. It has access to the developers throughout the day. They are incredibly receptive. I mean, you see their responses on the forums as it is right now. But, we get a lot of questions answered. It's a really great place to be. So, if it's something that you're interested in doing, definitely take a look at the houses that are for sale. The estates aren't for sale yet. If you've been looking at the screenshots that we've had going on in the background, those are the custom-built estates. And I desperately, desperately want one. But we will have to see when the pricing comes online. But, yeah, I mean, if you love the idea of the game, the thing about this game is it resonates so much with me, with everything that I want, that I would feel terrible if I didn't support this game. I probably sound like such a shill right now, but it's the truth.
So, no, it's great. As somebody who's with 10 Ton Hammer and its struggles recently, like, we're noticing that people aren't supporting what they are really. It's kind of a trend that a lot of people think so many things come for free nowadays, and if we can look at EverQuest Next as an example, when you don't support what you love, it may not happen. These things cost money. They take time. People have to work to make these things. Believe it or not, everybody doesn't have all the free time. So definitely, if this is something you're into, support it, and wait maybe and watch the development until it comes to a time when it looks like, yeah, you definitely want to commit, and don't be afraid to do that. I think that we're going to talk about it a lot in the future, but one of the things that Astral touched on that I am definitely looking forward to in the future shows is kind of going over and going through this phased deployment process. I think it is really cool, and I have a ton to say about just the way they're doing the process itself. So But yeah, housing is the first element of that, and I'm looking forward to getting involved as soon as possible and, you know, connecting every way I can. It looks like a really fun game, a really fun concept, and I'm excited to dive into it with everybody here. So we want to thank you guys for coming on the show. I want to thank specifically, we have a ton of names I recognize in chat from regulars on our Friday show. Thank you guys for coming to this short notice show we kind of put together on a totally different topic. So thanks for being here. Thank you, Diggs and Sogs, our two co-hosts, for kind of handling the chat and moderating a little bit and kind of keeping things going. And again, a big thanks to the devs for showing up and answering a few questions that were being asked in there. We really appreciate it. You guys are always welcome to come back in. You're welcome to come on as guests on the show if there's a particular topic you have coming up that you want to talk about. We would love to be a way to provide that for the community in another format aside from the forums and dev blogs you do. So thanks everybody for coming. The very last thing I will say is, as typical tradition on Theory Forge, we like to send out a raid to a nearby fellow or somebody we appreciate that's either playing the game or people that we enjoy watching as streamers. So we're going to do the Twitch thing and drive a raid over to Evercast show, which is kicking off right now. They're still covering EverQuest Next, and they're talking about the news there and what's still going on with that game. So we're going to drop a link in the chat and go ahead and raid there and enjoy them. I enjoy them. So thank you guys so much for coming. Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Astral, for being on, and I will see you guys in about a week.
Yep, see ya.
Thanks, everyone.